Hey guys, what's up? How's everyone doing? This is Joker 237316619 here. Long ass username. I should have changed that username when I had the chance. But anyway, if you can't tell by the title of this video, this is going to be me comparing the late 90s, very early 2000s with today. Um, and the reason why I decided to make this video doesn't really has little to do with nostalgic purposes. It has more to do with just the vibe back then, why it was better than today, and why things were different. And I'm not gonna be shitting on today's society or anything like that. I'm just gonna talk about why I would much rather go back in time and relive those years as opposed to living in today's society. Uh, but I mean, I still like today's society. But I don't know. It's just not. It's not the ideal, type of society that I want to be a part of. Back then, it was the ideal type of society that I wanted to be a part of, and today I'm going to talk about why. So just a quick disclaimer, I don't really have a lot of scientific research or anything like that. These are just, my own personal ideas and, experiences. So let's get started. So the year is like 1999. I remember being in my room a lot. If I wasn't at school, I would have friends over from like second grade. I remember my room I had a ton of merchandise around my room, and it literally cost nothing. Like I had I was a huge fan. My brother and I were huge fans of wrestling. We were huge fans of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Mankind, Undertaker, Kane, you name it, just a whole bunch of wrestlers. We had a bunch of posters. We had a bunch of merchandise, just a bunch of T-shirts, belts, WWE belt, F belts, well WWF back in the day, and we also had a bunch of superhero themed products and items. I was a huge Batman fan as a kid, a huge Spider-Man fan. I was a huge superhero fan in general. So we had a whole bunch of stuff. And on top of that, we had pretty much every video game system that you could think of, aside from, I can't remember if the first PlayStation was released back then, but we had a Super Nintendo, we had a Sega Genesis, we had just a bunch of video game consoles. Um, so anyway, from that and also like we had a bunch of action figures, you know, and I was a huge fan of action figures back in the day. And if you compare like action figures, that's like a stupid example, but if you compare like action figures back then to today, there's a huge difference. All right, action figures back then, they were a huge part of any kid's childhood. All right, it was a huge part of my childhood. I had so many action figures, and they all looked really cool. They all looked really cool. They had high production value. Nowadays, like just this past week, I went to like this store to grab an action figure for my nephew, and he was with me at the time, and I was literally I was not impressed with any of the action figures, and neither was he. He was looking at like Spider-Man, and he looked all fucked up and weird. It was crazy, man. Like back then, most of these big ass corporations, they were putting a lot of work and effort into producing action figures and stuff because these things would sell. A lot of people, a lot of little kids would buy them. But nowadays it's like kids don't even care about action figures. They just go on their iPads or whatever and play Candy Crush, Fortnite, whatever. It's just a completely different time. So as a result, all the action figures are suffering, and it's just a weird time to be a kid, and like in my opinion, just comparing my childhood to someone else's childhood nowadays, it's just weird. All right, my nephew, like, he's on his console, he has like a PS4, and he's only 10 years old, and he's playing Fortnite and a whole bunch of games like Grand Theft Auto and shit like that. Like, he would literally, that's the only thing that he would use for entertainment. If he's not watching TV, you know, he's on his PS4. There's nothing in between. No video game, no action figures, no board games, nothing. All right, it's just all purely digital. Everything is purely digital. It all has to do with your fucking TV. So, anyways, back then it was completely different. I remember being very energetic as a kid. I would, go outside. The sun was different. This is a really weird thing to say, but I feel really strongly about this. I feel like the sun shined a lot brighter back then. Maybe it's where I was from. I don't know. The weather, it was like during the summertime, it was so clear. Like, the sky was really blue. It looked very different than it is today. It looked kind of lighter and much more blue. The sun was really shined really strong. The air was different. I don't know what it was. It was just like, in terms of the atmosphere, it was just completely different. Um, and everything was just positive, man. Like, people, being around people was just extremely positive. I had like neighbors who would just sit out on their porches all day, just have conversations. They would just talk, and they would never get bored of the conversations. They would just keep thinking of things to say. And it stayed that way up until, like, I don't know, like 2007 or something. But yeah, I remember like the year 2000 and 2001, like, they had such a huge influence on me as a kid. Um, like, I don't know, there was just a whole bunch of things to do. I was chasing girls around that, like, I was like 11 or 12 years old. I was chasing girls at that time. That's such a weird thing to say, but yeah, I was like trying to get girls' numbers. Um, my friends and I would hop on our skateboards. We would have skateboards, and we would, ride around the neighborhood, and we would see girls going to malls. Girls our ages. Um, we would try to get their numbers, and it was a lot easier to talk to girls back then. Because girls, they didn't really expect that much from you. And it stayed that way up until like my mid-teens or something. It wasn't until like 2012 where things started going downhill. All right, where girls would only talk to you based on your social status, based on how much money you make, based on what you have to look like a fucking model. You have to have like this high reputation. It's just, there are way too many things that girls want from guys nowadays. All right, and also I realized that nowadays it's like girls just want to be in relationships. Like, I literally asked, like, I had this conversation with my ex-girlfriend, and she said that the reason why she was in a relationship, the reason why she would ever go into a relationship is that, like, is so she doesn't feel alone, is so she doesn't feel lonely. Like, she has to have someone with her at all times. And to me, like, even though I could understand that, to me it was kind of a weird response. Like, I wouldn't think of, like, I don't go into relationships just so I can, have someone to talk to 24 hours a day. It's because, I have like strong feelings towards a girl, and I really want to, I really want to be in a relationship. It's a feeling that you get. It's not like, oh, I don't want to be alone, so, let me just get into a relationship. you know. So nowadays it's kind of like that, you know, and they would literally ditch you for any fucking, if a better opportunity comes their way, they would ditch you in a second, you know. And social media is completely amplifying that shit. They would go to like Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat, TikTok, whatever, and they would see people that, you know, much that are much more successful, much better looking than you are, you know. Just they make it seem on these videos that they have a much better life than you do, and as a result, you see these girls trying to chase these guys instead, you know, and you end up like suffering the consequences as a result. It's such a weird time that we live in. Back then, they had nothing to compare. Like the only thing that they could compare uh, you to. That was such a weird way of. I said that. What? Anyway, um, they would either compare you to a celebrity or like to someone that they knew. All right, they didn't have these social media platforms where they could just, you know, go to Instagram and see what other people looked like and just compare you to these people. Like they didn't have these resources um, at their disposal. They just had whatever was around them, and that's what was so cool back then, was that you actually cared, you actually worried about your own vicinity, your own area, as opposed to the things that were happening in other places around the world, in other cities, in other states. It was all about what was going on in your neighborhood, what was going on in your region, so to speak. So girls, you know, if like they would get into relationships with people that they actually liked, all right, and it was easier because you didn't really have much to live up to. It's like you had to have like a sense of humor. You had to be somewhat good looking. You had to be interesting, sort of, but that was about it. You know, that's about it. It wasn't nearly as difficult as it is today. You know, so I don't know why I immediately started talking about, you know, relationships, but in a nutshell, that's, you know, relationships were a lot more satisfying back then than they are today. You know, because you weren't really worrying that much about competition. Sure, there were girls that cheated back then, but you know, they weren't nearly as many as they are today. You know, it was just easier to find loyal girls that would stick with you, you know, and that would really appreciate you. And back then, girls didn't really ask for much. You know, they just wanted to feel special. They just, you know, on Valentine's Day or something, they wanted, like, they expected roses from you or something like that. It was just super easy shit, you know, to take care of. It's not like, oh, like there's this whole entity of social media where you're constantly trying to live up to the people that are, you know, that are posting shit like that. I don't know how to explain it. It's really tough nowadays. It's really tough. And I know for a fact that there are girls out there who still, like, who don't really care that much about the people on social media. So they don't act that way, but it's hard to find them. It's really hard to find them because, you know, in all, you know, let's be honest. In all honesty, that's the way society seems to be heading nowadays. It's like every girl is trying to look for someone who could satisfy her every fucking need. You know, and it's just really difficult to do as a human being, as a normal human being who has a normal job, who has a normal lifestyle, just like every other human being does. All right. So I don't want to go too much into detail about relationships, but I think you get, you know, what I'm trying to say. Um, what else? Another thing was that another thing is that you got to be more creative back in like the early 2000s. I remember we had a lot of things to do, even though there wasn't social media and the technology wasn't that advanced. We had a lot to do. We would go to like the movie theater. We would go skating, we would play outside, we would do a whole bunch of random shit, and that would make up most of our day, on the weekend, and we would have the time of our lives, and we would also go to places that weren't really familiar with as kids. It's like nowadays kids, they have to have their smartphones on them at all times, and as soon as they go to an unfamiliar place, they immediately pull up their phone, to try and see, to try and find their way back, because they don't feel safe around this neighborhood or whatever, you know. But to be honest, like that's what makes you human. Like you live and you learn. It's something that is completely forgotten nowadays. Back then, it was like that. You had to be street smart. You had to learn. You had to, you live and you learn. That's how it is. That's how life is in general. And if you don't have these experiences, then you're never gonna be like you're never gonna reach your full potential as a human being. Um, so yeah, we would go to these random places that, and we would go like I would literally go far from my house. Basically, we would go to other neighborhoods, and we would try to find our way back. And if we couldn't, we would ask someone to lead us there. And people were a lot more. Uh, they were a lot more willing to help back then. Because nobody was way too self-centered and narcissistic like today. Like most people today, they're like that. They just care about themselves. They don't really care about helping other people. They don't really care about, I don't know, making an influence or something like that. They don't really care about that. They just care about themselves. Um, as a kid, I was a highly motivated person, and so were my friends. We all had dreams, we all had goals, and the times that we were living in basically, like, they encouraged your dreams, they encouraged your goals, and you actually felt like you could actually accomplish your dream back then. Nowadays it's extremely difficult to do so because nowadays if you take everything into consideration, like the economy and all of that shit, everything is super expensive nowadays. If you're trying to reach something, if you're trying to, I don't know, be an actor, or you're trying to be a director or something like that, it's much more difficult because you have to worry about paying your bills, you have to worry about doing all these things, and just, you know everything is a lot more expensive than it once was. All right, than it was in the early I literally remember a time in the late 90's, early 2000s where things weren't as expensive as they are today. So your goals seemed that much attainable back then. Like it was something that you could strive towards. It was something that you could, dream about. But nowadays it's like, I got to do anything. I got to work anywhere, even if it's a job that I hate, just so I can pay my bills. And it's a cycle that never ends. You just keep going and going and going and going, and hope one day that you've made just enough, uh, just the right amount of money, so you can go and pursue your dreams. But that might take years for you to do. It's crazy, man. It's really, really crazy. I don't really think YouTube and anything like that is making things easier. I think life in general, basic life, basic needs, those are the things that make things easier, not social media, in my opinion. All right, even though YouTube is a great um, platform for people to use to produce content, I don't think it's the thing that will allow them to get places. Basically, I don't know. It's like I feel like I have mixed feelings about it. Um, but yeah, even like movies, entertainment wise, movies were different. Like I feel like trailers, they're ruining the shit out of movies. You go on YouTube and you see a whole bunch of movie trailers, and you've seen by the time the movie trailer ends, you've seen like over 60% of the actual movie. So you just, so when you go to like a movie, to the actual movie, when you go to the theater and watch the movie, you're actually paying for, just the third act of a film because you've already seen what happens, from the beginning of the movie, like to like, you've already seen like 75% of the movie, you know. Back then, you could either, back then in like the late 90s, early 2000s, the only way you could watch movie trailers was in a movie theater, or like if you have like a VHS tape of a movie, sometimes they would play like these trailers before the actual movie, but that was about it. You didn't really have the internet. The internet wasn't really advanced back then, so it was kind of slow. It was really slow, and there was no such thing as YouTube, so you couldn't really watch movie trailers. All right, and that's what was so cool. Like I remember watching, what was it called? I remember watching Blade, like the Wesley Snipes film, and I was blown away by that film. I was blown away by so many other films, but just because, back then you could just look at a poster, a movie poster, and the poster of the film would look really cool, and you would just go in and watch the movie. Like the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film when it first came out, dude, like that huge poster, with Spider-Man in his suit, it looked fucking incredible, and I hadn't seen any trailer, I hadn't seen any clips prior to watching the movie. And when I finally watched the movie with my friends in the theater, it was mind blowing. We were blown away by the special effects. We were blown away by everything because we literally had no expectations. All right, other than like we knew that we were going into a Spider-Man film, but we didn't know what it was going to be about. We didn't know how good it was going to be. Like we had no idea what we were walking into. All right, and that's what was so great about that time. I want to go back to that time where I could just go to a movie theater having knowing nothing about the fucking movie. I just want to sit there and watch it for the first time, and have like a giant tub of popcorn and just God, man, I really miss that time, man. I really really miss that time. Um, I'm not gonna go into like music and stuff like that, even though most of the music that I listen to nowadays was from like the early to mid 2000s. I listen to modern music, but to me it's, I don't know. I'm not an expert on that subject, so I like there was crappy music. There was certainly crappy music back then, and there was also good music. And today, I feel like it's the same. There's a lot of crappy music today, uh, but there's also good music at the same time. Um, but yeah, the reason why I prefer like the late 90s, early 2000s over today is because of how simple it was. Like people, like kids nowadays, they don't understand, like they think that just because you don't have a smartphone doesn't mean like they actually think that without your smartphone you can't survive. You literally can't go anywhere, you can't do anything, you can't call anybody. But that's not true. Like it was really easy back then. And as a matter of fact, like smartphones have made things a lot more complicated than they should be. And that's why people, I feel like, I'm just gonna go ahead and say this. I feel like a lot of like things like social anxiety and stuff like that, I don't think they were that apparent back in like the early 2000s, late 90s. They weren't that integrated into our society as much as they are today. Today it's like insanity, dude. It's like it's freaking insane. And I feel like the smartphones in general and all our highly advanced media outlets, those are the prime reasons as to why these things exist. All right, people just don't know how to function. They don't. It's because they don't have one-on-one conversations with people on a regular basis. It always has to roam around some sort of app or smartphone or anything of that matter. You know, it's it's crazy, man. It's crazy. Like once you stop knowing how to like behave like a normal human being, when you feel like there are other things that are distracting you or preventing you from acting like a human being, that's when you know that you know your life is just becoming miserable and complicated and depressing and a whole bunch of negative shit. It's crazy, man. Uh, Holy shit! This video is like it's already like 26 minutes on. Um, so here's the thing. This is this is gonna be this is probably gonna be like a two-parter. So this is just like the first part of the video. I'm probably gonna post the second part later on. Uh, so I hope you enjoyed the first part. Please make sure to leave a like, comment, share, and let me know what you think. Like I said, none of like the things that I talked about in this video were written down or anything like that. I actually thought about them as I went along, and yeah, I really think that there's a lot of things that people who are coming up in today's generation, there's a lot of things that they can learn from the previous generations, like the late 90s, early 2000s. Those were such great times, not because of nostalgic reasons, but because of just the overall vibe. It was a lot easier back. It was a lot easier to talk to people. Like there was a sense of community. There was a sense of optimism. Nowadays there's just a lot of like nowadays the overall tone in general is dark, bleak, miserable, um, and people are getting involved in things that don't really add value to their lives in any particular way. It's just we're living in very weird times nowadays. We're living in very, very weird times. But anyway, I'll leave that to a second video, the second part of this video. Please let me know what you think. Hope you enjoyed this video. Take care. See you soon. Bye.